Some information on the X-T3. Logical information, anyway. Specifically information on the XH1, which we've already confirmed from Nokoshita and all the camera specifications as well as the images, with a nice back button autofocus. And oddly enough, it looks exactly the same size and the same concave dimensions of the one on the Nikon D4 and other Nikon cameras. Interesting. Also, too, what Fujifilm calls the sub-monitor display. Some people call it the top display. I've been reading comments, and a lot of the things that actually pop up always make good ideas for videos, because the stuff that I take for granted is apparently some of the stuff that other people just don't understand. And someone would say, in the case of like an X-T3, for example, the camera for later this year, this is the X-T2, why would I need 3 displays? I don't know. Let me see. Not that I'm comparing Fujifilm to Nikon here, but what's the one thing that every Nikon user has been enjoying now for quite a long time? I'm pretty sure we have the Viewfinder. Now, we certainly don't have as much information in the optical Viewfinder. We only have the bottom digital readout, but we do have information through the Viewfinder. We have a rear LCD display. Of course, this one isn't a flip out like on modern Nikons. And we also have a top LCD display. See, that's something that people have been enjoying on Nikon for quite a long time for a lot of reasons. There's actually, when a lot of people turn their cameras on, they're actually not looking through the viewfinder, or if this was a flip-out screen, you know, pulling it back and taking a look at the back of the LCD display. Rather turning it on, making some adjustments off the top LCD display. One thing too that's superior on the Fujifilm, what they call it the top display. Fujifilm calls it the sub-monitor. I actually showed you that, and looking at the dimensions relative to the shutter wheel display, that the sub-monitor display on the GFX here, the medium format camera, is identical in size on the XH1 by simple comparison from the images on the XH1. What I'm actually going to tell you, and is that what I never realized, and none of you did, and no one else has commented on, is the first time I've heard it, that when this GFX form factor came out with a slim sort of version of the the Nikon D750 grip that everybody loved, the really thin form factor grip, is that this is the first iteration and what will basically manifest itself throughout Fujifilm's cameras. What you don't realize, because you don't think like a camera designer, and doesn't matter whether it's their medium format camera or their new hybrid XH1 or the X-T2, is that the most valuable thing on any camera is real estate. That's not my opinion, that's a fact. The most valuable thing on any camera is real estate. The exposure compensation button has to go. It does not exist. What it does is a tiny button. I'm talking about the actual dial. Excuse me, the exposure compensation dial needs to go on the X-T3 Fujifilm, and I'm going to give you the logical reasons for that in a second. What we're probably going to see, and this is speculation on my part, but there are no logical reasons to keep the exposure compensation dial on the X-T3. None. Okay, we already don't have it on the GFX. We know for a fact we don't have it on their hybrid XH1, and surely to God it is not going to exist on the X-T3. Is there a likelihood it's going to look like a slightly different version of the X-T2? Yes, but I would put money, hardcore money, and I'm not a gambling person, on the fact the X-T3 is going to have the same form factor of the XH1. It is not going to have an exposure compensation dial. There's no reason to have it. Now, I know the first thing you're going to say is, well, what about the other 2 dials? If you're going to argue for removing, it's one of the great things about the Fuji are the dials, and I'll certainly agree with you. Here's a fact that you probably haven't considered because you rush to judgment without thinking. You need to think like a chess player, and you certainly need to think like a camera designer who's thinking about real estate, is that, A, these 2 dials are dual dials, dual wheels. We actually have, of course, our ISO and our modes, and on the shutter wheel we actually have our photometry, or our matrix metering, spot metering. These are dual-purpose dials. The exposure compensation dial, once you actually set it to C, where you can actually adjust +5 stops, -5 stops, I haven't touched this exposure compensation dial, and God knows how many months. Why? Because once I set it to C, I don't have to. This is an enormous amount of real estate being taken up on the top of the X-T2, which now, factually, does not exist on the GFX. Like, well, that's a completely different camera. That's medium format. It's huge. All of that's true. But now there's a small version of the GFX, which is the XH1. It doesn't exist on there either. They've replaced it, logically so, with this tiny little button. It's a little bit bigger than this on the XH1. And also, too, on the X-T2, when you set it to C, all I have to do is actually choose like an aperture priority between pressing in my front command dial and actually choosing between ISO and dialing in my exposure comp. I go over to my exposure comp, press it in, go over to that, and set it for wherever I want. There's no reason at all to keep the exposure compensation wheel on the X-T3. What we'll actually see and will make manifest from my prediction, which is 100% logical. It is. It's 100% logical. You can't argue against it. Is that we have, when the X, well, much larger, we can ignore the fact that obviously to hell it's much larger. In the form factor, a la the sub-monitor display or the top display, whatever you want to call it, and the actual grip and the bottom and forward sloping, which by the way is basically reminiscent of every Nikon flagship camera. What we saw in the GFX is the path that Fujifilm is following. So what we're going to have is the GFX. We have the GFX. Then we have the XH1, which is a miniature version of the GFX in form factor, with the same display, the same shutter release, a slightly different exposure compensation button, but basically the same in the same location. And the X-T3 should look exactly like, with some minor changes hither and there on different buttons, look like the XH1. Same as Nikon, many people turn their cameras on from underneath their chin and they want to do a couple adjustments without pulling out the LCD or looking through the viewfinder. I know you're thinking, well, right now you don't have a viewfinder. Currently sitting on the GFX, this camera comes with a viewfinder, but I mean you could use the LCD screen for you. I mean the GFX is slow anyway. But there's every reason, just like any Nikon camera, and this is not exclusive to Nikon, to have the top display, to have the viewfinder, whether that's optical viewfinder or electronic. I know the electronic has more information, obviously so, and the LCD. There are reasons to have all three of those, so the arguments for people say, well, why do we need another display? Well, for the same reason, we have it on Canon and Nikon. Everybody loves the grip on the GFX, the small form factor on the miniature version, and the body form factor on the XH1. Everybody should be incredibly happy with it. And further still, like looking down on the LCD on the XH1 and on the X-T3, which is coming out. If I have the LCD actually pulled out, and I'm actually doing a video, I don't want the information. I'm not a videographer, but I do know this much at least, that I don't want that video image being disturbed by an enormous amount of data clutter. There is, importantly so, on the top of the GFX and the sub-monitor display, a button, and it's also found on the XH1, for illumination. This is programmable too, and as exists on the GFX, as I showed you in the prior video, you can customize this for photography and make it totally different for video mode, and that is absolutely awesome. This is an enormously important amount of real estate. People don't get that we don't need a damn exposure compensation dial here. I never use this. I never use it. I've got it set to C. You know, it's time. Why would I ever? You know? There's no reason to keep it. That really incredibly valuable piece of real estate should not exist on the X-T3. It doesn't exist on the GFX. It doesn't exist on their hybrid camera coming out, the XH1. And absolutely logically, it should not exist on the X-T3. You cannot give me a single logical reason other than the fact that you like it that there will be an exposure compensation dial on the X-T3. You can't give me one. I like it, I use it, I don't want... Well, that's what you've gotten used to, but objectively and logically, you can't give me a reason for keeping the exposure compensation dial. You can't give me one, because that real estate is really valuable. That would be like buying some sort of $1 million piece of real estate in Beverly Hills and like sticking up a, let's say like a really low, like, an H&R Block, which basically barely covers the rent to even stay open. It's like you wouldn't buy $1 million piece of real estate to open up like a low income business. The exposure compensation dial is sitting on the real estate at the top of the camera, where we're talking about Beverly Hills real estate prices as far as real estate on a camera and what camera designers do, and you're not going to stick the exposure comp dial there again on the X-T3. There's just, and I would absolutely be gobsmacked. I hate that kind of word, actually. Gobsmacked if they stuck the exposure comp dial on the X. There's no reason. I know for also a damn fact, since everybody's been complaining about it for ages, is we see on the XH1, we see a huge, same as on the my Nikon D4 over here, a huge AF on button, i.e. a back button autofocus. There's no way in hell that the back button autofocus is not going to exist on the X-T3, because we know it exists on the XH1. All of these things, all of these facts and logic necessitate that the camera design, the de facto camera design, right now we have 2 out of 3 with this design. We have the GFX with this design, the sub-display, no exposure comp wheel here, rather an exposure comp button here, the form factor on the grip, and a smaller version of that in the XH1. So 2 out of 3 we've got where Fujifilm is selecting this as the form factor of their camera. Necessitatively, logically, and intelligently so, the X-T3 is going to be the same. So when you look at the pictures of the XH1, I don't bet money, but I'll lay a lot of money down on the fact that that's exactly what the X-T3 is going to look like. The back button autofocus sure to hell is going to be there. People would have a hissy fit if it wasn't, because everybody's been asking Fujifilm, but I need a back button autofocus on the X-T3. I gotta have it. That's one thing I love Fuji, but I need a big back button autofocus or AF on button. So that's going to be there. But there's no reason to keep this exposure compensation dial. None. None. It's like, I'm used to it, I like it. I understand that. But that's your personal preference, and you could adapt a little bit. Like Darwin's species, adapt or die. Not literally die, but, evolution. Realize that, hey, since technically I never need to touch the exposure compensation dial, if I set it to C, then, that's a valuable piece of real estate where I could stick something really important that I could actually customize for whether I'm shooting photography or video. Yeah, the other 2 control wheels are dual control wheels, so not single. Their real estate is 100% justified. So I know as soon as I make this video, people say, well, if you're going to remove that wheel, why not remove the other 2? Because the other 2 are justified. They're serving dual purposes. It's not single. The exposure compensation wheel is, it's not put, it's like the lazy dude that you hired that's like picking his nose rather than working. The exposure compensation is doing that real estate-wise on the design top plate, which is so incredibly valuable. Yeah, what I didn't realize, and neither did you, nor has anybody written an article on this fact, I'm saying it here first, is that nobody realized that the form factor of Fuji's GFX would be the ongoing product body configuration for, I hate updates on these stupid iPads. You need to update your software. Shut the hell up, iPad. That would be the form factor for all their ongoing cameras. So we already have 2 out of 3 with this form factor. And, see, we've got 2 out of 3, the new GFX, relatively new. The new XH1 with the exact same form factor. See, what is the likelihood of the X-T3 having the exact same form factor? Well, it's about just shy of 100%. So, I would be incredibly shocked if it was not. There's really almost no chance. Is this speculation? No, speculation is right. So I know there's a lot of people in the photography forums that love to talk about, oh my God, he got that wrong. They're really confused about a rumor and speculation and hyperbole and just pure, like, just off the wall, pure, just something pops in your brain. It's like, no, this is the reason why this is going to happen. Boom, 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 boom. Like I said, you can give me no logical reasons for that exposure comp wheel staying there. Because Fuji has already crucified it off of the GFX. They crucified it, I guess that's the wrong word, off of the XH1. And surely to God, they're going to, castrate's the wrong word too. They're going to remove it off the X-T3. Just as sure as the sun rises in the east, that will be the case. There's every logical reason that the X-T3 will be exactly like the form factor with maybe some minor changes hither and there on as the XH1. So this is about camera real estate, the most valuable thing in camera design. I love the wheels on the Fuji too. The wheels on the bus go round and round. I do. But the exposure comp wheels got to go. And that's not just my opinion. I know this will be the case. And of course I'll be the first person to say it. I would be really, 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 really damn shocked if I was wrong on this. Because everything I just said, all the facts support my position. We've already got 2 out of the 3 cameras that are that way. There's really no chance. It has to be that way. It could, no. It really does. And it makes sense too from Fuji. Actually, Japanese mindset, they love to have like a big version, and too much heterogeneous as opposed as homogeneous consistency in products, and it makes sense. So, like I said, what I didn't see and what you didn't see, but I'm saying it first, is that what we were seeing in the GFX form factor is what we're seeing down the line. This was step 1. Step 2, the XH1 looks exactly like the GFX except smaller. X-T3 is going to be the same thing. That's a good thing, because 99% of you that have Fujifilm cameras, X-T2s, yada yada, you don't have a GFX. I'm not boasting about that fact. My point is that you haven't used this. The actual grip on it's really, of course, it's going to be smaller on the X-T3 and on the XH1, but you've not used this sub-command display. You've not used this exposure comp button right by the... It's perfect. This isn't... not the X-T2 isn't really intelligent in design, but this is better. So, here we go with that. Thank you so much for watching. If you like these videos, you can always click the link below. Tell me to jump off a cliff. Or, whatever, float your boat and pet your pickle. Fuji! Oh, goodness.